explainable AI today always includes references to LIME, which is our perturbation-based explainer. Perturbation-based explanation methods often measure the contribution of an input feature to an image classifier's output by heuristically removing it via example such as blurring, add noise, or graying out, which often produce unrealistic out of samples. Interestingly, we are going to be talking about in which authors used a generative inpainter into three representation attribution methods to remove an input feature. Today, we are going to discuss with our speaker how these methods are useful compared to existing perturbation-based explainers. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Rehman Zafar, and I am a co-stream owner of ML Interpretability at Aggregate Intellect. Today, we are hosting Dr. Nguyen. Dr. An completed his PhD working with Jeff Klune and Yusinke in 2017, and since then has been an assistant professor at Auburn University. He also worked at Apple and Geometric Intelligence, acquired by Uber. In a previous life, and enjoyed building web interfaces at Bosch and invented a 3D input device for virtual reality environments, and is currently interested in making machine learning models more robust, transparent, and explainable. And his research has won Best Paper Awards at CVPR, GECCO, ICML Visualization Workshop, and he won Best Research Video Awards at IJCAI and AAAI conferences. His work has been covered by many media outlets, example, MIT Technology Review, Nature, Scientific American, and lectures at various institutions. Dr. An will be presenting explaining image classifiers by removing input features using generative models. It is highly interesting presentation, and I am looking forward to it. To the audience, please post your questions in the chat, and we will be asking your questions immediately after the presentation. So without further delay, I will now turn the presentation over to Dr. An. Please take it away. It is over to you, Dr. An.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rehman. Thanks for your invitation. So I'm very excited today to share with everyone about our new work published at ACCV 2020. It's called Explaining Image Classifiers by Removing Input Features Using Generative Models. This work was led by Chirag Agarwal, who is now a postdoc fellow at Harvard. This work was done at Auburn University. So as we know, AI's state-of-the-art are often confused by out-of-distribution examples. For example, image classifiers say this is a cheetah, starfish, gibbon, or school bus. Even in this case, you can clearly see the word F, D, and Y in there, but still it insists school bus. So these weird decisions made by AIs often confuse the end users. So what decisions they should make? Similarly, in NLP, in our recent preprint, state-of-the-art natural language understandings models correctly label these two questions. Does marijuana cause cancer, and how can smoking marijuana give you lung cancer? As a duplicate with high confidence. However, just by simply shuffling all the words in one question, the predictions remain constant, duplicate. And the network also thinks marijuana causes cancer is duplicates with cancer causes marijuana. Imagine in high-stake applications, what decisions should the end users make given such noisy behaviors of the network? And how can users know when to accept or reject network's decisions? So instead of just giving the users the predictions and the confidence scores, instead, the field of XAIs deals with, provides users with extra informations we call explanations. And based on these two, users hopefully will be able to happily reject or accept decisions correctly. One major type of explanations is visual, and it's called attribution methods. The idea here is if given an input image here of a flame, If you feed it to the network, it says 54% matchstick. So this is a correct prediction. And your attribution methods would take in the input, the model, and some hyperparameters, and it will draw an attribution maps here, which highlights the regions that is important for the decisions, and also the regions that are against the decisions, matchstick. So here it highlights the flame. This is a hypothetical attribution maps, for example. There are dozens of attribution methods has been proposed in the past 3 to 5 years. They have been covering from natural images to MRI brain scans, text, videos, and audios. However, one important line of work produces visual explanations these heat maps by removing the features in order to compute their importance. So in this simple image, for example, you want to know how important is the flame to the decision. So how do you figure that out, right? The idea, you can rephrase that into how does the prediction change if the flame is not present? This is exactly the idea of sliding patch or occlusions proposed by Zeiler and Fergus in 14. The idea here is you define a square gray patch and you slide it across this window, and you record the probability drop in this heat map. This is the difference between the predictions before and after. It's also called treatment effect in causal reasoning. So at the end, you will have this heat map. It highlights this region, which corresponds to the top part of the flame, is the most important to the matchstick decision. However, sliding patch has its own problems, as you may be able to tell. For example, if the object is too small and your patch size here, which is arbitrarily defined, is bigger, then you would have these square artifacts. So the explanation is coarse and it can be inaccurate because you have to arbitrarily define this square patch. So LIME is one solution to ameliorate this problem. Instead of defining a square patch, it divides the input image into a set of superpixels. So here are 7 by 7 superpixels, and it generates a set of randomly masked version. One version looks like this, but the second could look like a different set of superpixels being gray. So the idea here is you compute the importance for superpixels instead of for pixels or patches. And this importance is defined as the average score or confidence scores when the superpixel is visible. So marginalized all over all the set of randomly masked inputs. So you would have the final version that looks like this. So the resolution now is almost, in this case, is 7 by 7 because you have 49 superpixels. However, LIME, one problem with LIME is the resolution is coarse. And second is you have to define what color should you use to fill in the picture, right? Because the gray here, although it corresponds to 0 after mean subtraction, so it's maybe a natural choice. However, gray also has a meaning in natural images. It could mean like dark sky and corresponds to some dark scenes. So it will bias the explanations. For example, in this case, if these are 3 different images and randomly mask out using a LIME. So if you feed like 10, a lot of, I think we try 50,000 samples here and feed them through the network, it will most of the time say this is a jigsaw puzzle, which makes sense. So it will incorrectly bias the attribution methods. So one way to combat this gray pixel bias issues is to use a more natural removal operator. For example, here, Fong and Vidaldi invented meaningful perturbations, which the idea here is to remove features using a blur operator. So you blur out this flame to compute its confidence. Their methods proposes to solve this optimization problem, which is identify a minimal regions in this input image such that when you blur out would minimize the classification score. So minimizing both the blur version, minimizing the confidence scores of the blur inputs, and also minimize the mask region. So at the end, you would have more fine grain, and the operators now would change from gray to blur. Right? So it seems like blur is it's quite natural prior in natural images. However, it's not without limitations. So this is the one example ImageNet images of bustard, a type of big bird. If you blur it out with here Gaussian standard deviations of 10, 26% of the time, the network still can tell what type of object it is. So this is pretty large compared to originally 92%. If you gray out the bird, so leaving only the shape and the background, the network is still able to tell 13% of the time this is a bustard or some type of fine-grained image category. If you completely take out the object and inpaint with content consistent with the background, which is our method, is inpaint, the accuracy drops further to almost 9%, and comparing to noise reference, which is 4%. So using an inpainter removes the most discriminative features as it's supposed to, and produce the most realistic and visually plausible samples. So the idea of this paper is very simple, but I'm very excited about it. The idea here is to first synthesize, for example, if you want to compute the importance of this bustard, the big bird, you would synthesize all possible counterfactuals, all the scenarios where this bird is not present. So one case is the bird has gone somewhere to the right of the frame, and then nothing is left here. You only see the background, right? So this is one scenario. The second is you might see behind the bird there's a flower, right? Or in another case, although low probability, but you might, if you're lucky, see some fox running behind the bird. So that would be another counterfactuals. So the second key is to synthesize these counterfactuals and realistically. So you want the samples to be realistic, basically in the same distributions as the original inputs. And finally, you would compute the marginal attributions for each input features over all plausible counterfactuals you listed out. Each here has its own probability. So in case for sliding patch, this is the equation for sliding patch. So you would compute the probability drop and then multiply by the probability of each counterfactuals happening, and then sum them up. So this is the importance score or attribution score for some input feature, let's say superpixels or pixel level. So in this work, we tested the idea on both ImageNet and Places 365, which are large-scale data sets. We use a deep fill V1 and V2, which is the state-of-the-art at the moment. And I think it's now still the currently state-of-the-art for synthesizing ImageNet images. However, state-of-the-art only produces one single counterfactuals. The others are not realistic, so we only can obtain one realistic counterfactuals per scene. So that's a limitation of the current work. And we integrate deep fill into sliding patch, lime, and meaningful perturbations. In other words, for sliding patch, instead of the gray patch here, you would fill in the content from deep fill into this square patch. So you get these new samples more realistic. Instead of having something like a puzzle, jigsaw puzzle sample, you would fill in this mask region and you get more realistic sample. MP2, instead of blurring out the objects, you remove the objects using the generator, so also most realistic. So how does it work in the downstream task? of explanations, right? So first, what you find is this method, we append G to every counterparts methods we invented. It produces more accurate object localizations. So this is a bird, and this is a bounding box from human. This is a result from MP2G, our proposed method. And this is sliding patch, lime, meaningful perturbation, and advanced meaningful perturbations. So in numbers, the G methods are always better than their counterparts. Lime G is better than lime, SPG is better than SP. So there's a benefits quantitatively of integrating the inpainters into these different perturbation-based methods. It's also better than a related FIDO CA, which I do not have space to talk about, but I'm happy to take questions. In terms of accuracy of the explanations, we use two common proxy methods. One is called deletion metric. The other is saliency metrics. And on both fronts, the G methods, the methods with the inpainters, outperform their counterparts. So the explanations given by our methods are more accurate based on these proxies metrics. So why did it give you more accurate heat maps? Let's look at one anecdote. So here, if you slide this square patch for occlusions across the image, this is a confidence scores for the class nail, which is a predicted class. If the patches go near the nail, it drops to almost 70%. If it covers half of the nail, it's almost 0. Half of the nail, this is a 15%. And then if the patch is next to the nail, it's 40%. So at the end, you would have this coarse heat maps that covers the areas also outside the nail, and it's also important, indicating these are also important. But this is incorrect, right? Because we know the nail is the most important areas, not the things next to it. And here we plot the probability, the probabilities here for each frames as we move the sliding patch across the image. You can see it drops right here at before 24 when the patch is not even touching the nail yet. However, with the inpainters, if you take this patch and you infill with the inpainter's content, the probabilities go back to high, 98%, which is what it's supposed to be. And similarly here, if you inpaint, the confidence scores go up correctly. And the confidence scores only drops to near 0 when you completely remove the nail. Otherwise, confidence scores will be high. So at the end, because of this, it will just highlight the nail regions in this final heat map of SPG. So this is intuition why SPG is better than SP. For lime, another intuition here is before all the counterfactual samples from limes, they are heavily biased towards 1, 2, 3 classes: jigsaw puzzle, maze, and hand of the woods. However, with these more realistic, plausible samples, the class distributions of these samples now are much more uniform. So in conclusions, the idea of this paper, it's very simple. Compute the importance scores for an input features by marginalizing over all plausible counterfactuals using generative models. And we found that these simple methods improve the heat map object localizations, the explanation accuracy, and explanation robustness, which I did not include in this presentation because of the time, but I'm happy to take further questions. And paper and code is available on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. M. We will start the question and answer part of the session, and we will be presenting Dr. M with live questions as well as questions we had received in advance. So the first question is, Do explanations become more robust and accurate if input features are removed via a strong natural image prior?
Right. The answer. Thanks for your questions. So from our finding, the with using the strong image priors, you would have more accurate object localizations. So your heat maps will capture the objects, the main objects, more accurately. According to deletion and saliency metrics, the explanation is more accurate. And also the explanation is more robust to hyperparameter changes, which I did not show here, but we have the results in the paper. Basically, as you change the patch size of the occlusion, the heat map will stay more constant.
All right. So can we say if we are we are localizing these objects better, so we are going to get better accuracy and accurate explanations?
Right. This is a bit of a debatable question. So the assumptions here behind this object localization metric is because ImageNet is object centric, and usually you have only a single object in per image. So the better you can localize the objects, the better you found the important features, which is the idea. However, sometimes the network does actually uses the background, not the main object. So in that case, this metric will be off. But that is, I think, for a small amount of samples.
All right. Thank you. And the next question is, what is the state of the art and what attribution maps do you recommend?
Right. I think there are dozens of attribution methods. And there's a paper, maybe you have seen El-Sharif's 2018 called Saliency Sanity Checks for Attribution Maps. It shows that a lot of methods actually do not hold a promise. So it's really a very challenging question. It really depends on what works the best. For example, GradCam is 2016 methods, but it's almost still in order computation numbers. It's still a better method than other gradient-based methods. GradCam is not included here because it's gradient-based, and here we only deal with perturbations-based. So
right.
I would suggest if you use gradient-based methods, I would use GradCam. If you use perturbation-based methods, which you consider the network as only black box, then you could try our method.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. And the next question is how you are computing reliability and effectiveness of your explainer.
Right. So reliability is very important issues, and we have a CVPR 2020 paper published last year showing that if you change just a single hyperparameter, which is often chosen arbitrarily, then your heat map will change radically. And this is a huge problem. So for all the methods, I suggest we have to measure the reliability first before see what works for you. In terms of effectiveness, I advise that every method in XAI in attribution maps space, they want to actually test the heat maps on humans rather than just using the proxies, which are now gradually become more and more debatable metrics.
All right, thank you. And next, it is not a question, it is more like a request from a target audience. So they are saying, if you have skipped anything in this presentation because of time reasons, can you discuss here?
Right. So let me open the paper. So one aspect I did not discuss is robustness. Basically, the robustness here means that for sliding patch, for Lime and MP, you all have some hyperparameters. For example, in sliding patch, it is the patch size. For Lime is how many superpixels do you use, and what color, right? For meaningful perturbation, what is the width of your Gaussian blur operator, and how many steps do you run your iterative optimizations? So these are all arbitrary decisions you have to make when you run these methods. So robustness here means when you use a generator, actually the MP2G, SPG, and LimeG, they have more consistent heat maps. They change less as you vary these arbitrary defined hyperparameters.
All right. Thank you. The last, can you suggest some dimensions, research dimensions that you think we need to work on, and these are useful to explore regarding your work?
Right. I think the next open question here is, can we build a generative models that captures, for example, the real world, so that you can synthesize realistic and many different counterfactuals. So I think this is still the open challenge, because inpainters nowadays, they only mostly works for faces or cars very impressively, but for ImageNet, it's not yet able to synthesize different objects and then different variations of the objects. So if you have such a world model, then I think this method would work much better.
All right. Before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts that you would like to share with us?
Right. I think this is very exciting area of XAI, and a lot of works. I think there have been dozens of surveys as well on this topic. I encourage everyone to, if you're interested in research in this area, please run human studies to test these heat maps on humans before inventing a new methods or new metrics.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question from the audience. Can you comment at a very high level on recommended hyperparameter tuning strategies?
Right. There are existing hyperparameters, automatic optimization for hyperparameters, for example, Optuna or Bayesian optimizations. You can use out of the box so that you don't have to deal with. But as a engineer practitioners, you may want to tune by yourself to first get the intuitions, so that which range of values for each hyperparameters makes sense, and then within that range you can search using a random search.
All right, thank you. Dr. Ann, I thank you for a great presentation, and we thank all who joined us online. To see more free content like this, please visit our website at ai.science and log in to access slides for this and other sessions. Also, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, ML Papers Explained, to get notified about all the live sessions and other free content we publish. This concludes our event. Thank you for watching. We encourage you all to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our website at ai.science. Thank you.
Thank you, Rehman.